It was July 1967 when I arrived in Yellow Springs to begin my Antioch adventure. I was 17 years old, and this was my first time living away from home. Antioch's co-op program had attracted me to the school. I wanted something different from the standard college education, and that's exactly what I got. I was excited and I was scared. My first co-op in September 1967 took me to the Mississippi Delta, where I directed a tutoring center for Black children who had been marginalized by the recently integrated white school system. For my next co-op, I spent 3 months in Mexico, where I studied at the Universidad de Guanajuato. My third co-op took me to an experimental high school for troubled boys in Philadelphia, followed by a co-op in Dayton, where I worked as a substitute teacher in the public schools. With each co-op experience, I gained skills that would be critical to my career in the law. In Mississippi, I learned how to shoot a gun. Now, I hate guns, but when the house across the street from you is blown up by the KKK, you learn to shoot a gun. That's what you do. There, I also saw that there were people of goodwill of all colors who had the courage to stand up for what is right. In Mexico, I learned that racism is alive and well in countries other than the United States. I lived with a wealthy Mexican family of Spanish descent who treated me well. At the same time, the woman responsible for cleaning their large home was an underpaid, underappreciated, indigenous, dark-skinned Mexican woman, Mexico's version of the help. My frustration with the racist caste system in Mexico led me to switch my major from Spanish to drama and speech. Being a theater major at Antioch was amazing. I was able to pursue my love of music and stage performance at a time when Black theater was emerging around the country. For my senior project in 1971, I designed the lighting, built the set, and directed The Dutchman by Amiri Baraka. When he wrote the play, he was known as Leroy Jones. Antioch's outdoor amphitheater was world famous for its annual performances of Shakespeare's plays. Its faculty had a stellar reputation that included the late Meredith Dallas, under whom I had the good fortune to study. 4 years later, I graduated from Antioch a very different person from when I entered, inside and out. On the outside, I had gone from wearing straightened hair to sporting an afro that rivaled that worn by Angela Davis. And on the inside, I had transformed from a sheltered, naive Black girl from Ardmore, Pennsylvania, to a well-traveled, outspoken, Black and I'm proud 21-year-old, determined to do my part in the struggle for racial and economic justice. There had been an unprecedented uptick in the admission of Black students at Antioch, due in large part to the Rockefeller Program scholarships. The Black student presence on the campus created an interesting environment, and that's truly an understatement. During my 4 years there, the Black students and their allies staged a sit-in that shut down the administration building. We created a Black student dorm. We created our own courses that included one on dialectical materialism, and we demanded more relevant courses, and that's just for starters. A civil rights complaint brought by an Antioch student who opposed our Black dorm eventually succeeded in shutting it down. He was a conservative Black student whose name I dare not speak. All in all, my time at Antioch was one of the most interesting and exciting experiences a college student could have. In 1971, I graduated from Antioch and headed to Stanford Law School. And I quickly realized how Antioch had spoiled me. This was law school. I wasn't used to raising my hand in class, sitting quietly in classrooms with more than 100 students, listening to hour-long lectures, speaking only when called on, and being judged solely by my grades. The Antioch learn for the sake of learning model doesn't work in law school. I adjusted and somehow got through my classes that included the incredibly boring courses on taxation, torts, and real property. In 1974, I graduated from Stanford and set out to make a difference, still energized by my time in Yellow Springs. Unable to secure a job with any of the Bay Area corporate law firms, hiring a black woman with a large afro was not going to happen, I realized that I had to make a way where there was no way. I opted to open a law practice in East Palo Alto, California, a low-income community of African Americans and Latinos, literally across the highway from opulent Stanford University and wealthy Palo Alto. In 1975, I became the first lawyer to open a private law practice in that community. No simple feat, since I had to figure out how to buy a building with no money and deal with the repayment of my looming college and law school student loans. Somehow, I convinced a bank to give me a loan to buy the building, crossed my fingers, and opened my doors to anyone with a legal problem. It's what's called a survival law practice. I survived. It was a godsend that the NAACP Legal Defense Fund awarded me an Earl Warren Fellowship that subsidized some of the expenses of my law practice. My Antioch degree in drama and speech would serve me well, both as a litigator and as a trial judge. After all, the courtroom is nothing if not drama. For trial attorneys, jurors are the audience. Our job is to persuade jurors to our points of view. My very first jury trial, right out of law school, was in federal court in San Francisco. My clients were a young black couple who were refused the opportunity to rent an apartment at a large complex because of their race. They alleged a violation of their civil rights. The all-white jury ruled against them. I was devastated, but vowed to press on. I continued to pursue civil rights litigation during the 6 years that I ran my law office. And during that time, I married and had the first of my 2 daughters. In 1978, I was offered the position as Assistant Dean of Stanford Law School. My job was to increase the enrollment of black and brown students. Fortunately, I was given free rein to make this happen. So I created a common sense 2-step approach. First, go where the students are, meet them, talk to them, and encourage them to apply. I visited historically black colleges and went to universities with critical masses of Latino students, schools where Stanford had never before recruited. The second step is to keep talking to the students once they are admitted. Visit them, meet one-on-one, and have alumni and professors stay in frequent contact with them. It worked. At the end of my first year as assistant dean, Stanford led the nation in its enrollment of students of color among major law schools. In 1980, after having my second daughter, I decided to apply for a judgeship. 2 years later, I got what I wanted. Governor Jerry Brown appointed me to the municipal court in Santa Clara County, making me the first African-American woman judge in Northern California. As a lawyer, I had appeared before judges, most of them white males, several of whom were disrespectful to litigants of color, poor litigants, and to me, frequently the only black woman attorney in their courtrooms. I was determined to be a judge who would treat everyone in her court with respect and fairness, and I was terrified. But my Antioch training in drama came through for me again. The judge is the producer-director, and the courtroom, well, that's my house. People stand when I ask them, they speak when I tell them, and I have the final say. Judging is the perfect job for a drama major. 6 years into my judgeship, I ran for a seat on the Superior Court, a trial court that handled more serious cases than those in the municipal court. It was a hotly contested election in which my opponent was a white male prosecutor. I won, and in 1988 became the first African-American Superior Court judge in the county's history and the first Black woman judge on the Superior Court in all of Northern California. During my 19 years on the bench, I never lost that Antiochian drive to give back and to make the system do better. After I was hit by a drunk driver, I was the first judge in California to order convicted drunk drivers to install breath devices in their cars. That was in 1987. Today, almost all 50 states now utilize these devices in sentencing these drivers. In 1989, I was the first judge in California to create a supervised visitation program to facilitate contacts between children and their non-custodial parents. I used my drawing skills to create legal cartoons that I donated to nonprofits for fundraisers. Some of the cartoons offended my fellow judges, but that's another story. I also drew charcoal portraits, something that I began doing while at Antioch. My drawings have been sold to benefit a variety of nonprofits. Judges aren't supposed to be political, but sometimes you just have to be. I was the first judge in California to call for the divestment of judicial pension funds from companies doing business in South Africa until apartheid was dismantled. Judges take an oath to uphold the Constitution and the laws of our country. In California, that included upholding the three strikes law enacted in the mid-1990s. I could not, in good conscience, continue to sentence defendants, most of whom were Black and brown, to life sentences under this draconian law. So, in 2001, after nearly 20 years on the bench, I retired. But I continue to speak out against the three strikes law and against California's death penalty by writing op-eds and by supporting legislation to end the death penalty and to revise the three strikes law. We succeeded in making the three strikes law more humane, and we've come close to abolishing the death penalty. It's going to happen in our lifetimes. After leaving the bench, I served as the vice provost of Stanford University for 8 years until 2009. In 2010, I was appointed the independent police auditor for the city of San Jose, where I engaged in civilian oversight of the city's police department. It was that job that introduced me to the world of policing and led me to speak out about the need for greater transparency. My work in this field led me to assist in drafting a state Senate bill that prohibits the use of grand juries by prosecutors when there are officer-involved shooting fatalities. The governor signed that bill into law in 2015. Now I'm retired, sort of. I'm part of the resistance, and I'm doing what I can to help stop the madness that daily bombards us from the White House. And today, I've come full circle back to Antioch as the 2017 recipient of the Horace Mann Award. This is a big deal. What Horace Mann stood for today is as relevant, if not more so, than it was in the mid-1800s. About our public schools, he said, "The public school is the greatest discovery made by man or woman." And he said this, "Jails and state prisons are the complement of schools. So many less as you have of the latter, so many more you must have of the former." Horace Mann nailed it. So, my fellow Antiochians, let us fight, resist, and persist as never before. Let us, as Congressman John Lewis described his civil rights work, make necessary trouble. And let each of us, in the words of Horace Mann, be ashamed to die until you have won some victory for humanity. Thank you so very much for this honor.